Spring Profiles has to be one of the most compelling features of Spring Boot. And I don't even want to say Spring Boot because Spring Profiles have been kicking ass long before Spring Boot was even a thing. But the problem with Spring Profiles is that they're a moderately advanced feature. They're not hard. They're actually really easy to get your head around, but you don't really appreciate their utility, their benefit, until you're on an enterprise project that has multiple deployment targets, like a Docker container, a Kubernetes cluster, AWS Beanstalk, or Tomcat running on bare metal, or you've got multiple staging environments, you've got local dev, you've got a sandbox environment, UAT, pre-prod, and prod. In those types of situations, Spring Profiles saves you time and it really saves your skin. Hi, I'm Cameron McKenzie. I'm the editor-in-chief over at theserverside.com, and I have to be one of the world's biggest Spring and Spring Boot advocates. And as you can see, I've got a lot of enthusiasm for Spring Profiles because I think they really are a pretty amazing feature. And I want to share that enthusiasm with you, starting off with how you can use Spring Profiles and do some very interesting configuration with your application property files. And that is what we're going to do next. So I'm a big fan of practical examples, and I want to show you something here that I think you're going to start including in your Spring Boot applications right away. Now, there's something I really hate about this program here, and well, hate is a strong word. There's something that I don't like about this program, and you're probably looking at this program thinking it's a handsome program. What could Cameron possibly not like about it? Well, let me run this program. Right-click, run as a Spring Boot application, and this might be something that you dislike as well, but look at that. All I wanted was to print out Spring Profiles example, and I get all of this logging, I get all of this banner, and this is just a simple standalone application. You start using Spring Data, you start using REST API, Spring MVC, and you want to print out one little line as you're debugging an application, and you've got to sift through hundreds of lines of logging. Now, in production, we need these logs, right? We want to keep track of what's going, but not in development. So here's what I can do with Spring Profiles. I can go and see that application properties file, and I can create my own. I can say, I want to use a properties file that is specific for dev. So I create a file called application-dev.properties. Make sure I spelled that correctly. My fat fingers didn't get in the way. And then I can throw in a little Spring setting here. I can say logging threshold.console equals warn. I don't want trace messages. I don't want info messages. I only want console messages and anything at the log level of warning. Now I click Control S here. Because it says application.dev, this configuration will only be observed if this application is run using the dev profile, using the environment that's set up to be configured for the dev. Now, I mean, the next question is, how do you set up the environment for just dev? There's a number of ways to do it, but the easiest way is to go into the base application properties file and just say Spring Profiles.active equals dev. Now, the next time I run this application and Spring boots up and runs my code, it's going to realize that the active profile is dev. If there's any configuration settings, we should actually go into application-dev.properties first. Okay, look in there for any configuration settings, and then go to application properties after that. So I click Control S, I save. Now I come back to this example here. I say run as a Java application. And boom, the only thing I get is that banner. I don't have all of those superfluous log elements, and then it says Spring Profiles example right there. Now, if I was actually to run this in the production environment using the prod profile or any other profile, that reduction of the logging environment isn't going to happen. So if it's a non-dev profile, a non-dev environment, it'll go back to the more verbose logging. And we can actually simulate that. I'm going to right click on this and say run as configuration. Okay, so this allows me to set up some configuration properties for the runtime environment rather than just using the basic runtime environment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, when this runs, I want to pass in a JVM argument that says the active profile is prod. Now I don't have an active profile. We can actually say active profile maybe equals default. That might make more sense. If you did have a prod environment, you might have an application-prod.properties file with prod configuration. But we'll just say that if it's not dev, then we want to use the standard configuration that we would get with just the application properties file. So I'll click apply there. Now when I click run, notice that we are back to the original configuration. Now, I didn't change the properties file. Okay, so inside my application, while I'm doing local development, I'm saying I want this to run as a developer, as my dev environment, where I'm not given every trace message. I'm just given warnings, and I can see what's printed out using console statements. That's dev. But when this application gets run on Tomcat or something like that, or another server, and somebody's got control of the runtime, they put it into production, they want to override that. And they want to say, hey, I don't want to use that dev configuration. We will configure this so that it runs as prod or default or some other mode. I'll just show you that again. So that was run as run configuration does it. And then it's this argument right here that you add in. And you'll notice that argument is just the JVM argument -d spring.profiles.active equals default. It's the same property that's inside of the application as we're doing development. It just gets overridden at runtime. And by the way, if you now put this into a Docker container, you could do a setting that says spring.profiles.active equals Docker if you had a application-docker properties file, and that would override all of the other settings, right? So that's the idea. Now you can really configure your environment. Now, by the way, one other thing that really bothers me is that banner. I really dislike that banner. I don't want this to be verbose anymore. One of the cool things that you can do is you can actually stop that banner from showing up too. So I'm going to say, hey, I don't want to use this Spring banner here. I just want a nice simple banner. So I'm going to go over to resources and say I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it mybanner.txt. And in here I'm going to say, hey, follow me on Twitter and YouTube at CameronMCNZ, subscribe. The active profile is active profile. I specialize in, I'm not going to say that, just say what the active profile is. Here, you could specify the version and the application name of Spring. It's kind of some cool stuff. But the idea is maybe when you're doing development, you don't want that annoying Spring. I mean, not that Spring's annoying, but you don't want that banner coming up. You just want it simple, telling you what environment you're running in, maybe some details about the environment as well. Now, when I go and run this, now I'm going to go say run configurations. Just going to want to get rid of that environment there. I don't want that floating around like a bad odor. Okay, so we don't have a JVM environment overriding everything. In application.properties, it's specified that the profile is indeed dev. And for application properties inside dev, oh, I put that in the wrong spot. Forgive me. One of the properties here is that we want logging at the warn level for the console. And also, we don't want to use the annoying Spring banner. All due respect to people that created it. I've seen it so many times. We want something simple. So we're going to use my banner in the resources file. Okay, so let's see what happens when we run this again. Make sure everything's saved. Control S. Here is my profiles example. Okay, let me see the code there. Getting a little lost here. Run as a Java application. And boom, no longer do we have that Spring banner coming up. Okay, so it's not polluted. It actually gives us some information about our environment. Obviously, a little plug for you to subscribe on YouTube. But it says the active profile is dev. And then it says profile example is running a Spring Boot 3.3.4. And then it says my printout right there. Now, I'm telling you. Now, by the way, you can actually just put that into any application.properties file. You don't have to create dev. But the point is, if you put that into the regular application properties file and then they do deployment and then someone says, hey, how come we've got a stupid thing that says follow Cameron on Twitter every time the application boots up and we're not doing normal logging? Well, you're going to be in a world of hurt. But you just do it in your dev environment. And then when we go to prod, we use the prod environment or the default environment, the default profile. Well, you're good, right? That solves all of those problems. So there you go. That is kind of the start of how Spring profiles work. You can set up application properties for different environments, specify which environment you want to run in, either in the application properties file or even by overriding it when you deploy onto the JVM through JVM arguments or through environment variables when you deploy to Docker. And you can configure your local environment any way you want. And then when it goes out into deployment, well, the DevOps people and the neckbeards can configure it for those environments. Now, I also want to say Spring Profiles is more than just application properties. In fact, probably its greatest utility is when it's used for switching out classes, maybe when you're doing testing of your applications. Doing that is what we're going to take a look at next. One of the problems with dealing with an advanced topic like Spring Profiles, and I say advanced, but not difficult. Once you kind of go through this tutorial, you'll be an expert with it. But one of the problems with a concept like this is finding an example that is simple enough to drive the concept home, but not so simple that it's hello world and it insults your brain. I think I found a nice little balance here. I've got an application on the left-hand side that's just a number guessing game. If you read through it, you see we grab input from the user through the console using the scanner. We use scanner.nextInt to get the number from the user. Then we generate a magic number. And you can see we use something called a generator there, and specifically line 28. That generator references the number generator on line 17. There's a class called number generator. In fact, it's an interface. You can see it line 6 on the right-hand side, left-hand side for people in Australia. And that number generator interface is a method called getNumber. The implementing class is the random number generator that generates a random number between 0 and 1,000. Once we've got that, we can say to the user, hey, your guess was lower, or your guess was higher, or your guess was right on. We can play the game, and life is good, right? Claim victory. We created our application. But there's a real problem here. And the problem is, how do you test this, right? Like, let's say we wanted to test the condition where we wanted to print out, you should have guessed higher. So we can come over here. By the way, there's the full code there if you want to see all of the code for that class. Let me see, we get a full screen there. I mean, if you want to see all of the crazy stuff, I think it fits on the screen right there. So run as a Java application. It's going to come up. It's going to say, hey, enter a number. So I want to guess the condition where the guess, I want to test the condition where the guess is lower than the magic number. So I'll say 500. And no, I should have said guess higher. So yeah, the number was 270, so it was too high, not too low. So I guess I'm gonna have to do this, another 700, 800,000 times to get the test right for lower. Maybe that's a 50-50. Maybe that's closer to 50-50. But I mean, if I want to test the condition where the guess is equal to the magic number, right? Like, okay, well, was it 72? No, it was 904. Okay, try again. Like, testing this is going to be an absolute nightmare. Okay, so here is how you resolve that. Okay, what you do is you say this random number, that's for prod. Okay, when we run in prod, we'll use the random number. But you know what? When I'm doing development, when I'm doing testing, when I'm putting this application together, I'm going to use a static number generator that returns the number 7 all the time. So I can test lower, because 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0 are lower. I can test higher, 8, 9, 10 is higher. And I can test right on, 7 I'm not going to have any problems, right? It's going to make things very, very easy for me to do development, very, very easy for me to do testing. So I can say, hey, this is a component that's required. And then I can say the profile for this is dev. Okay. And so now anytime we run in dev, it's going to be the number 7 that gets wired into the application. It's going to be the static number generator that gets wired in on line 17. When we ask for a number on line 28, it's going to give us the number 7. And if we want to test that condition where we nail things right on the money, we can say run as application. When it asks us for the number, we can type in 7 and boom, the magic number was 7. Spring profile example. And then, you know what? We want to push this out to prod. Well, we can actually override this by using a JVM setting or an environment variable setting in Kubernetes or Docker. Locally, I can switch it by just saying active profile is prod, come back to my code, right click, run as a Java application, and now I should get back to that random number. 88, shout out to the greatest hockey player of all time. You can see 698 there. So we now have that random number. Now, by the way, here's another little trick that I like a lot. And I use this a lot. You can have dev, you can have prod, but you can also just have not dev. It's just kind of cool. It's kind of like, yeah, this one's for dev, and then this one's for anything that's not dev. We're just happy using this one. This one works everywhere. The only place it's a problem is that rotten dev, and that will work as well. So now if we put that in, and what is our profile? Our profile is prod. Well, we should get the random number once again. So run that as a Java application. And there we go, number 8. And there you go, 540. Let me just move that around. If you want to see all the code there for that class, there it is. Click pause on the recording right there. That shows you everything. And then let me bring this over here. I'm just going to move this around. So this class was difficult to fit entirely on the screen, but I'll let you see the whole thing. There's a few imports at the top, but I don't think you need to be too interested in those. You can figure those out. But yeah, let me just show you the full code there. As you can see, it's just a Spring Boot application. One object auto-wired there. It's an interface, but we implemented in 2 different classes. And then it implements command line runner interface, which means we can actually run it. By the way, I've got a full tutorial on autowired. I got a tutorial on @component and a tutorial on creating a standalone application with a command line runner. So feel free to check that out. But that looks like the whole code on the page right there. And there you go. I think we're good at this point. And I'll show you, last but not least, that application properties file. And I'll show you that dev file. And a lot of people ask me about that thing where I changed the banner. They're like, oh, you can do that? And it's like, look how easy it is. And you can see I've got my banner on the left-hand side under resources, and I just point to that, and well, I just have a nice, handsome banner when the application starts up. Okay, there you go. I think that's everything that you need to know in order to be very, very dangerous with Spring profiles. If you enjoyed this tutorial, why don't you head over to theserverside.com. I'm the editor-in-chief over there. I've got lots of great tutorials on Spring and Spring Boot and Java development and Scrum and Agile. If you're interested in my personal antics, you can follow me on Twitter @CameronMCNZ. And of course, I've written a couple of books, so a couple of books behind me there. Pickering and Springfield, all about The Simpsons, Hibernate Made Easy, which Spring devs like. What is WebSphere doesn't sell too well these days. And then I also noticed Darcy DeClute Scrum Master Certification Guide had helped on some final edits. If you're agile doing Scrum, you want to advance your career, you want to get Scrum Master certification, people have been purchasing that book and scoring 100% on the first try on both the Scrum Master and Product Owner exam. I actually used it to get the PSM1 and PSM2 designation. So if you're agile and working with Scrum and you want to get Scrum certified, check that out. And then finally, I would just kindly ask that if you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment and subscribe on YouTube.